what's your overall feeling or maybe suggestion to the newly released budget 2022?
Well, we think that this is Labour's backwards budget, and that's because for New Zealanders who have been looking for a way out of the cost of living crisis, instead what this budget has given them are forecasts which show that their own households will be going backwards, that the government books will be going backwards, and that the New Zealand economy will be going backwards. So we think it's a very disappointing budget. It doesn't address the fundamental drivers which are leading to the cost of living crisis. It involves a blowout in government spending with huge amounts of spending, yet little new outcomes being proposed. And it continues to tax New Zealanders at levels that we think are too high and will put the country into further levels of debt. So we're very disappointed in the budget.
Yeah. So how about if we compare this budget to the previous budget, which is the budget 2021, do you think any improvement or both are disappointing?
Well, what we've seen is continued levels of very high spending. And what we would expect is that that spending might have reduced now that we're not having the lockdowns that were involved with the pandemic. Instead, in this budget, we are spending as a country 7 billion more than had been forecast previously. And the Finance Minister has dipped into next year's budget allocation and the year after that. And so huge amounts of spending. We don't think the discipline that you would expect. And a forecast that inflation, which is a robber in everyone's pocket right now, is set to continue, not just this year, but next year and the year after that, at levels far above the 3% limit that New Zealand used to have in place. So we can see that that's going to make it very difficult for many New Zealanders, not only as they watch prices increase, but also because we know that interest rates will have to rise to deal with that inflation. And that's going to be very hard for anyone who has a mortgage or who has borrowings from the bank, because the costs of that borrowing are going to increase significantly.
Yeah, thank you. I think, like you mentioned a couple of times, the inflation problem, the living crisis, like I think on March 24th, you mentioned that inflation is a thief in New Zealanders and Kiwis' pocket. So do you still hold that opinion? Do you think that the inflation situation become worse and worse?
Yes, absolutely, because inflation at the moment is so high that it's rising faster than wages. So it means New Zealanders can get less with their money and they're paying more just to stand still. So I know that in many households, they're having to really juggle to meet the extra costs. Every time they go to the supermarket, they fill up at the petrol pump, they pay rent or their mortgage, they're finding that it costs more and more. And so many New Zealanders do feel that they're slipping backwards each week because their incomes are not keeping up with prices. So we're very concerned at the effect inflation is having across the economy. It's also making it very difficult for businesses who are finding their supplies are costing more and it's more difficult to make profits. So inflation is a terrible curse in an economy, and it's something that National is determined to stamp out.
Yeah, thank you. Like you just mentioned, the Grant Robinson, financial minister, has already spent $8.4 billion for the budget 2022, and also rated the following year's budget. Do you agree with him? Like you just mentioned, maybe not agree, right? So what do you think is the best way to give the money back to New Zealanders to relieve? Yes.
Yes, well, we're very concerned at the level of spending because Grant Robinson has added the biggest ever amount to a budget in New Zealand's history. And then he's gone further and he's rated next year's budget allocation and the year after that. So very elevated levels of spending. And what we've seen from Labour is that even when they spend more, they don't necessarily get results. And we can see that there are a number of things in this budget that we don't think should be a priority right now. For example, the Three Waters reform to local government water infrastructure at a cost of $1 billion, hundreds of millions of dollars going into restructuring the health system, $300 million going into merging RNZ and TVNZ. Those shouldn't be priorities. Also, a lot of money being wasted on additional staff for government departments, additional strategies, and we think a continuation of some quite wasteful spending. So we would prefer to see some of that money returned to New Zealanders in the form of tax reduction. We've put forward a proposal to adjust the brackets in our tax system so that an average income New Zealand household would be better off to the tune of $1,600 a year. We think that would be fair. That would be a permanent change. It would mean that New Zealanders could look forward to keeping more of their own money. And we think that that would be a much better approach right now than continuing to spend more and more government money putting fuel on the inflationary fire.
Yeah, thank you. Like you just mentioned, the restructuring housing system, you mentioned you are not very satisfied with the Labour government. And I remember last time we talked to each other, we discussed about the current housing crisis. So after half a year, do you think that crisis become a little bit calmed down or still?
Well, we can still see a lot of problems in the housing market. One of them is that rents have climbed very high. We've had the biggest increase in rental costs ever in New Zealand's history. They've gone up $50 a week on average in the past year. And that's a direct consequence of the government's changes to the tax policies for landlords, the removal of interest deductibility and the extension of the Bright Line capital gains tax. National's policy is to reverse those changes, because what we've seen with increased rents is that's led to more people without a home waiting on the State House waiting list, and thousands of families now raising their children in emergency motel rooms. So that situation has got worse, not better, and National is determined to reverse those tax changes and ensure we can once again have a healthy private rental market.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we also noticed from the budget 2022, the Ministry of Housing introduced more support for first home buyers and renters, like the first home grants, first home loans. So from your point of view, do you think this policy will be effective, or maybe just like Kiwi Build?
Well, look, we think that this policy is something that we're okay to support, but we're doubtful about how big a difference it will make, because increasingly first home buyers are being challenged by the fact that interest rates are climbing. And that's going to mean that servicing a mortgage will be more challenging. The government also hasn't fixed the Consumer Credit Guarantees Act, which has made it much harder for many people to get a mortgage. It's changed the rules that banks have to apply and has made it really difficult for people to get lending. So National would want to fix that, because we think that that's one of the major barriers. We continue to think that Kiwi Build has been a complete failure. $2 billion allocated, 100,000 homes promised, and as of last week, Jackie, only 1,300 built. So a real failure of a policy.
Yeah, thank you. So like you also mentioned, the infrastructure is quite concerned by Kiwis, also by Chinese New Zealanders. Like this Friday, not last Friday, the Harbour Bridge closed again. So many of our subscribers are wondering, when will the second Harbour Bridge be built successfully, and when will that begin to build? And from the budget 2022, the Labour government also mentioned about the infrastructure plan, but they didn't mention the second harbour crossing. So what's your comments regarding this issue?
Yes, well, National thinks that a second harbour crossing for Auckland must be a priority. It's clearly something that we need for the growth of New Zealand's biggest city, and that we need, as you say, for resilience, because when the Harbour Bridge closes at the moment, it causes extreme disruption. We've seen Labour prevaricate on its plans here. You saw $50 million spent consulting on the idea of a pedestrian cycling bridge across the harbour, an idea that wasn't popular and has now been abandoned. We think that there should be a commitment to a second harbour crossing, and you will see when we release our infrastructure policies next year that that will be a priority for us.
Yeah, thank you. Like you mentioned, the cycling bridge, the government also, I think, cost hundreds of millions dollars to invest the feasibility of this bridge and even rent an office for that bridge. Do you think that's kind of waste of money, waste of the taxpayers' money?
Yes, it's a very good example of the wasteful approach to taxpayers' money being taken under Labor. So $50 million was spent thinking about the bridge, and then it was abandoned as an idea. And even today, the government is still paying rent on a harbour office right on the Auckland Harbour that was meant to be housing the officials working on the new cycling bridge. That office sits empty, and that's a real waste of money. And we're concerned that the Labor government has had wasteful spending across a number of government departments. Waka Kotahi, who are in charge of road building, have more than doubled the number of communication staff they employ and are spending tens of millions of dollars on new advertising campaigns. National thinks that New Zealanders just actually want to see transport built. They don't want to see all the money on the wasted projects. So that's a part of the approach that we will bring in government: discipline and careful spending.
Yeah, thank you. And also another quite hot topic we're kind of worried by the Chinese community is about the education, because in the budget 2022, the government introduced the fair equity funding system to replace the current school declares. So what is your comment regarding this policy? Do you think probably this policy will affect the housing market, like double grammar Zoom will not exist anymore?
Well, National and government did ourselves explore the idea for a modernisation of the decile funding system towards a more targeted system, because we felt that the old system was outdated and not working as well as needed. So we have advocated for a different approach. The question for Labor will be how they execute this policy, because we have seen many times that Labor gets an A for announcement, but a D for delivery. So we will be watching this policy very closely. I don't think that it will impact on great schools like Auckland Grammar and others who will continue to be able to provide excellent education. More generally, National is concerned with slipping education standards across our schools. We've got truancy issues with a large number of young people not attending school regularly, but also achievement issues with achievement across literacy, numeracy, and core skills dropping. And so National is doing work to see how we can lift those standards and have a higher performance and better education standards in our schools.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. So overall, some people think the budget 2022 totally ignore the middle class. Like, for example, those people who earned below 70,000 can get an allowance, but those middle class kind of ignored by the Labour government. So do you agree with them? And what is the best way, in your opinion, to benefit the middle class?
Yes, well, National is very concerned that the squeezed middle have yet again missed out in this budget. The squeezed middle are those New Zealanders who are working very hard each day but don't qualify for government entitlements and yet are being very stretched by the rising cost of living. And what we've seen from this government is a band-aid payment being offered to a limited number of New Zealanders. Anyone earning the average wage will miss out on the payment altogether. And even those who qualify for the payment will only get it for 3 months. It's only temporary. It will not last long. So even while the cost of living will continue to increase, the payment will end. National prefers a more generous and permanent approach, and that is tax reduction. Our tax reduction plan would mean anyone earning $50,000 a year or more would be better off. A $55,000 earner would get $800 a year, but not just this year, every year into the future. And we think that's a better, fairer approach.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. So the government, the Labour government, predicted that the economy is expected to strengthen from the second half of this year. Do you agree with them? And do you think, are you confident with the New Zealand economy or worried?
Well, when we look at the Treasury forecasts that were released with this budget, they show clearly an expectation that inflation will continue this year, next year, and the year after that, well outside the target band. So that is very concerning for the New Zealand economy. And we will also see that growth rates have declined from what they were predicted to be just 6 months ago. So that's also concerning. And unemployment is predicted to increase faster than had previously been estimated. So all of that is concerning for New Zealanders in terms of their ability to get ahead. It's also concerning for the government books because the government is now set to be in deficit until 2025 at the earliest, and so is accumulating a lot more debt that your children and my children will have to pay off. So we are very concerned about that.
Thank you. And also another phenomenon we noticed is that in those downtown areas, especially like Auckland CBD, it's kind of getting dangerous. So in your opinion, why those security issues appeared again in New Zealand? And do you think that situation will continue for a long time?
Well, National is very concerned about the law and order issues in our communities. Keeping New Zealanders safe is one of our core priorities and values. We think that growing gang membership is a significant cause of our crime issues, and we continue to urge the government to crack down on the gangs, including, for example, by using firearm prohibition orders to stop gang members being able to get firearms. We think this government is too soft on crime, and that there needs to be a much clearer approach of supporting the police to go after criminals and where needed to make sure that they are sentenced appropriately. We want to see the police equipped, we want to see law and order returned, and we want to see gangs made to feel very unwelcome in our cities. We also note that in Auckland and Wellington in particular, where we've seen a lot of crime in the central city, that has tended to be associated with big increases in the number of people living in emergency housing in the central city. And we continue to say that there has to be a better approach than that, and we do not want to see those continuing rises in the number of people living in temporary emergency accommodation, unsupervised and without the support they need to resolve any underlying problems they have and to get into permanent housing.
Thank you. I think overall, generally, people want to see more certainty and want to be more confident about the New Zealand economy. Whatever you are the middle class or maybe some people who live in an emergency house, they still want the New Zealand's economy to be better, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think all New Zealanders want to be able to get up each morning and know that if we work hard, we can get ahead. And the sad thing at the moment is that many people feel no matter how hard they're working, they're standing still or going backwards. And that is not a good way for things to be. And that's why National thinks it's so important that we have in place good, careful economic management. And we have a 5-point plan to address inflation and the cost of living crisis. We would reduce the costs being added to businesses, unblock bottlenecks in the productive economy, including fixing immigration settings. We would bring discipline to government spending, focus the Reserve Bank on price stability, and as I said earlier, introduce a program of tax reduction.
Yeah, thank you. And in order to address the inflation issue, the RBNZ also increased the official cash rate a couple of times, and maybe next week they will increase 50 basic points again. So what's your comment regarding that?
Well, the Reserve Bank has a job to do to put the lid back on inflation, and unfortunately, lifting interest rates is the key way for achieving that. We saw at the last Reserve Bank monetary policy session the biggest increase in interest rates that we've seen in one go in 22 years. So that's going to have a big impact on mortgage holders who will find when they go to refix their mortgage that they'll have a much higher interest rate and they'll have to pay a lot more. So we do worry about the impact that will have on households who will now be, in some cases, paying thousands more each year for their mortgage. And we're particularly conscious of those first home buyers who borrowed a lot in a rising market for a home and who will now be facing really difficult and high costs. So this is yet another reason why the government should put in place an inflation busting plan so that it can support the Reserve Bank, and the Reserve Bank doesn't need to do as aggressive interest rate rises in the future.
Yeah, thank you. So my last question is, Nicola, are you confident regarding the next year's election? And do you have any special words you would like to say or share with the Chinese New Zealanders?
Well, National's grateful for the increasing levels of support that we are getting in the community. And we know that many New Zealanders feel the country is going in the wrong direction and they want to see a return to disciplined, strong economic leadership. That's what National would provide, and we will be working hard over this next year and a half to demonstrate to people that we are worthy of their confidence and worthy of their support and votes. And my message for the Chinese community is to say thank you so much to all of you who already support National. And for those of you who are considering your choices for the future, can I say that we want to back you, your effort, your entrepreneurship, your innovation. We want to make this a country where you can get ahead, where you can feel safe, and where you can rely on good, strong government services. So please stay in touch with National and our team, and we look forward to earning your support in the coming election.